Scriptures become real. It's again a podcast where we learn, where we study, where we grow, where we try to become the best versions of ourselves as we can, as we continue to serve our Lord. You guys find the podcast on YouTube or anywhere else you get your podcasts. We're just so thankful you guys are here, that you guys have found us, and that you guys are with us today. All right, guys, I am so excited to talk about this. This is probably one of my favorite topics I've studied. And I love studying this topic, but I've never seen it from this perspective. It's absolutely incredible. So I cannot wait to show you this. And again, thank you guys so much for your downloads, for just wanting to be a part of this and building this thing with us as we're trying to grow and challenge each other and help each other. This is why we exist, right? So we're so thankful for you guys, and we're glad that you guys are here with us, okay? So here's where we want to go as we get started with our podcast today. One of my favorite parts of ministry, it's not necessarily getting up in public and talking, even though that's a part of the job, right? It's not what people say, right? Whether it's like, you did a great podcast, or you did a great sermon, or you're a great person. You appreciate those things, and you appreciate what people say, and you're thankful for that. My favorite part of ministry that God has taught me now is not those things at all. It's seeing people. What do you talk about seeing people? That makes no sense. I mean, if you go to church, you see people, right? If you go to camps, you see people. If you go to lectureships and conventions and all these things, you see people. So why is that your favorite part? I'm not talking about just seeing people. I'm talking about seeing people. And it's a different way to see, because it trains yourself to see the invisible, to take time to be silent and look at people's quirks. Look at how when people talk, what are the things that they bring up all the time? What are they silently crying out for that they won't tell you? They won't tell you right now, but because of the conversation and what they're bringing up, this is their way to cry for help. To silently see people and then to just silently help them. It's the most incredible feeling, and it makes so much more sense of why Jesus talks about the way that we serve. It should get to the point where that becomes why and how we serve. It's incredible. So what we're going to do today as we look at this, the topic of our podcast is sometimes you have to be invisible to be seen. Sometimes you have to be invisible to be seen. You know, there's moments in our lives, and maybe you feel like this right now. You're in the gym, you're walking, you're studying with a group of people, you're studying by yourself. It's not like you don't have friends. It's not like you don't have places to go, right? It's not like you don't know people. But sometimes in this life, there could be a sense of invisibility. And only you know, it differs from person to person. But there's a level of feeling invisible. And what's so crazy about feeling invisible is we assume someone feels invisible. Well, they're by themselves. They're secluded, so therefore they feel invisible. Can that fit in that circumstance? There's no doubt. There's no doubt it could definitely fit in that circumstance. And as you're listening and studying with us, that literally might be your circumstance. But also, here's what's crazy about invisibility too, is you could be surrounded by a bunch of people all the time, and you could still feel invisible. So invisibility, we can't put a box around it. And because someone's in a certain situation, well, that's the only way that you can feel invisible. You can feel invisible with people around you too. And so sometimes I hope that whether you're in a state where you're isolated, or maybe you're in a state where you have people around you, that sense and that level, and it's almost like I've described it this way before, this invisibility, it almost is like this cloak, right, that goes around you, and it hugs you. And as this cloak hugs you, only you know that you feel invisible. And so now, when you're in that situation, the only thing that you want is maybe not someone to take away a problem, maybe for someone to not to come and fix things and come into your life and solve things. What means so much to people that feel invisible is they want somebody to see that they're invisible. It is the most rewarding feeling when you look at someone, irregardless of their situation, they're invisible. They've got the cloak on, and they want somebody to see that they're invisible. And so as we learn, Obviously, Jesus was the master teacher, God the Father himself being able to see people, Jesus being able to see people. But I want to look at an example from the Old Testament from human perspective to human perspective. We're going to look at two people who were invisible and both people saw each other. It's so great. Two people that were invisible, but both people saw each other. So as we study this, right, again, you guys do a great job of doing this already, but have your Bible open with me if you're in a group study. Have your Bibles open. Go back if you're in the gym, walking, whatever the case might be. Go back and look at these verses. This is huge. So you're going to need to circle, highlight, because we're going back in time here to Israel, and we're going to go back into the text, and we're just going to walk through the text and let the text paint the picture for us, all right? So we got to take our glasses, and we're going to look from one invisible perspective and then another invisible perspective, and then we're going to see how they begin to see each other. And maybe this can help us as we help other people to see them too. It's so rewarding, all right? So let's go to the text. 1 Kings 17. I'm so excited to look at this. This is great. This is great. I've never seen it this way. 1 Kings 17. All right, beginning in verse 1. All right, so Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall not be dew nor rain these years, except for at my word. Now, let's stop and pause there. Circle or highlight Ahab and Elijah there. Now, think about the setting. Elijah's the prophet, all right? So now he goes to the king's court and he talks to King Ahab. Now, if we know our history, Ahab was an evil king. And remember, who was his wife? Jezebel. And Jezebel was almost as evil as he was. So now think about the power in Israel, and think about how they're dominating everything in Israel along with what Baal is doing, right? So now all of this is happening, and then Elijah comes to the king, and he basically says, there shall not be dew. No, and I love how he describes that. There's not going to be dew or rain all these years except for at my word. So until God tells me that there's going to be dew and rain, it's going to be a drought. So now here's my question. How do you think Ahab and Jezebel's taking that? What are you talking about? There's going to be a drought. Who is the God that you serve? What are you talking about? There's going to be a drought in this land. So now, guess who becomes public enemy number one from this point? Elijah the Tishbite. Now, remember in 1 Kings 19, we've studied this in multiple ways. But remember in 1 Kings 19, that's when Jezebel chases Elijah out, and Elijah basically says, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And God talks with Elijah. I believe that depression that we see in 1 Kings 19, the root of it begins in 17. Because Elijah begins to see who he's dealing with. So now, imagine someone who's out in public. Keep that in mind. I want you to write that in your notes as you're studying with me. Someone, a prophet who is out in public, this is what happens to him when he's out in public. So then notice what happens, verse 2. The word of the Lord came to him saying, get away from here. This is to Elijah. Get away from here and turn eastward and hide by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan. It will be that you will drink from the brook that I've commanded the ravens to feed you there. All right, so now he gets this word from Ahab. So now God says, I want you to leave from here and I want you to go to Cherith, right? And as you go to Cherith, in this drought that's going to happen for these years, there's going to be a brook there, right? And with this brook, you'll be able to have water, okay? So here's what's interesting. Cherith, it's very interesting where this is. As we talk about where Cherith was a place that was hidden. Now, as it's a place that's hidden, it's very interesting what the imagery that God is painting here. Elijah's in public, but now I want you to go eastward to Cherith, and now I want you to be hidden there. I want you to be hidden there. Now, again, what is our subject? What are we talking about? Sometimes you have to be invisible to be seen. You know, what God and Jesus was able to do, as Jesus being God on earth, being perfect, he had the ability to see people. And when he saw them, he was able to help them, whether it was in public or whether it was in private. But he had the perfect balance of being able to see people in multitudes, but he also had the balance to see a man in John 5 who needed help, to see a woman in John 4 who needed help, to see Peter's mother-in-law who needed help. He had the ability to see people in private too, the people that were unseen, the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years. He had that ability to see them, the people that were hidden. You know, as you walk through life, you could feel that way. It's almost like God is hidden you. You're hidden. You're tucked away. And even if you feel invisible, no one's gonna see me. No one's gonna see me out here. Even if you're around a bunch of people all the time and you're doing a bunch of stuff, even if you're doing a bunch of really great stuff for God, you can feel almost as visible as someone who doesn't have anyone, who doesn't have people around them, who doesn't have a bunch of people around. So now you can feel, man, I'm kind of tucked away. Does God see me here? And if God doesn't see me, how in the world are others going to see that I'm invisible? How in the world are others going to see that you're invisible? Let's keep reading. You're going to go by the brook Cherith, which flows from the Jordan. And it shall be that you will drink from the brook. And I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. Now, remember, if you've been hiking, if you've been outside in general, right, you know what a picture of a brook looks like. Now, we got to keep this in mind. As we're talking about this, remember at the time, there's no dew and there's no rain. So that brook, by natural causes, is not going to keep flowing up. So if you're drinking from this brook for however long this is, and this is a long period of time, eventually what's going to happen to that water in the brook? Eventually it's going to be done. So now, I want you to drink from that brook, but watch what else I'll bring you. I have commanded the ravens to feed you. Circle, highlight, double highlight, triple highlight, do what you got to do and circle ravens there. Now remember, what are we talking about? Sometimes you have to be invisible to be seen. Now, the prophet that was prophesying in public, God has hidden him away in Cherith as an individual who's beginning to feel invisible here. The prophet is. Now, as he's feeling invisible, who's the first thing, item, animal, whatever, the first animal that God sends? He says, I will send you the ravens. Now, to Jewish culture, guess what ravens were? Ravens were unclean animals. So if an animal was unclean, you had nothing to do with said animal. So that animal that was unclean to a Jewish person, guess what that animal was to me? You're invisible. Do you see where we're going? The animal was invisible. Well, how do we know that? Remember with Cornelius in the book of Acts? All right, God sends him the vision of the unclean animals. And what does Peter say 3 times? No, 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 no. These animals are unclean. So now, to a prophet that's beginning the root of this invisibility, the root of this depression that he's feeling, now he's hidden away to where no one sees him, and now an unclean animal comes and feeds him. You see, sometimes in order to see the invisible, as God makes you invisible, sometimes it's important for you at times. And again, I don't think these times in our lives, we're not meant to stay in these periods. And I think what people can do is people can take advantage of these times. Well, I'm hidden, so I guess this is just where I need to be. You know, there's a time and there's a season for everything. So the time and the seasons might vary from person to person. Absolutely, no doubt, right? No argument there. But notice, as he's talking about this, he becomes invisible. Why does God make Elijah the prophet who was in public? Why does God make him invisible? So that he could have the discipline to see the invisible things around him. You see, in ministry, what can happen? And even in as you walk as a Christian, but specifically, I want to make this point in ministry. You're in public so much. You're up on stage so much. Your face is seen so much. Your presence is seen so much that sometimes what we forget to do is we forget to be invisible so that we could see the people that are invisible. Jesus was the master teacher in that he could preach the greatest sermon ever preached in Matthew chapter 5 to droves of multitudes, but at the same time he could give the same lesson and he could give the same principles in Luke chapter 6 on the Sermon on the Plain to his disciples. He could do the same thing. And so now guess what he's trying to train Elijah to do? I want you to be trained to see the invisible. But in order to see that, you're going to have to be invisible yourself. So now here's why I said in the beginning, what the Lord is teaching me and what he's taught me is and I'm telling you guys, if you let the Lord teach you how to do this, it is the most rewarding and most beautiful thing to see somebody who maybe doesn't talk a lot, to see somebody who maybe does talk a lot, but then you acknowledge, I know how you feel. You're invisible. And then they just break down. How'd you know? How could you see that? I didn't tell anybody. How could you? I've been invisible too. And then now there's a different type of connection with how you can help them with Christ. It's unreal, the service that you could do if you have the ability to see people that are invisible. It's almost like this. I was always growing up, I moved a lot growing up. And so in moving a lot, my brother and I, we went to a bunch of different schools, right? From elementary school to high school. We went to a variety of different schools. And I was always the new kid. So you go somewhere and there's just droves and droves and droves of kids, and you just kind of do your thing. You know people here and there, you make friends here and there, but you become so comfortable in that cloak that, you just kind of sit there and you feel invisible. But what I've never forgotten from my middle school, even my elementary years, I have not forgotten from my elementary years to my high school years. I have never forgotten the day where when I moved in, after weeks, months, the kid that sat next to me. Never forgotten that at every place that I've been. So now, it is a privilege now because I know what it felt like to feel invisible, but I'm in a public place. So now, as you know the feeling of feeling invisible, now you can see other things around you that are invisible. So now, what feeds Elijah? Ravens. At any point in time before this, would Elijah have really seen what a raven could do? Nope, you're unclean. So therefore, because I have no use for you and I can't see you, there's nothing that a raven could do. But what did God choose to feed Elijah? Something that seemed invisible to him. How can God help you? People that are invisible to you. No, they can't do anything. Okay. Notice verse 5. So he went and did according to the Lord, and he stayed by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan. The ravens, the unclean, invisible animal that I probably would have never noticed or never seen or never accepted anything from, the ravens who God sent, they brought me bread and meat in the morning, and they brought me bread and meat in the evening. So this is a callback to the children of Israel. What did God do with the manna and the quail? Did the same thing. Did the same thing for the children of Israel. So now he drank from the brook, verse 7, but it happened after a while that the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. So remember, now Elijah being invisible in this invisible place, now these ravens who in his eyes was invisible, he's beginning to see all these things around him that he never would have noticed before. Why? Because God made him invisible. Now he's starting to notice. But then the brook dries up. Now remember, why did it dry up? Because of verse 1. There's a drought in the land, and rain's not going to come until the Lord tells me to say it. Now, verse 8. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Arise and go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Okay, so again, we still got Elijah's glasses on. So now I want you to go to Zarephath, and I want you to dwell there. So leave Cherith and go to Zarephath. Why go from this place to this place, God? Here's the thing about Zarephath. Circle or highlight that place. Zarephath was not just a regular city. Zarephath was a Gentile city. To a Jew, what are Gentiles? They're dogs. They're people that we just don't see. They're people that are invisible to me. Huh. Interesting how God is setting all this stuff up. But do you see the progression of where God is taking Elijah? I think we do Elijah a disservice because when we talk about how Elijah felt, we'll run to 1 Kings 19, but we don't see the root of all these problems that begin 2 chapters before, maybe, I think even years before, based on the text in verse 17. Because what God is teaching Elijah, he's teaching him how to see the invisible. How to see the invisible. Now, watch this. Go to Zarephath, which is a Gentile city with people that you think are invisible. And I want you to dwell there. Wait, what? I want you to do what there? I don't want you just to visit. I don't want you just to go. I want you to dwell there and stay for a while. You know, here's the beautiful thing when you try to help, when you help people, and when there's people around you that are invisible, it's not going to happen after meeting them one time. It's not going to happen after talking to them one time. So in order to see invisible people, here's what you're going to have to do. Here's a couple things I want to show you. Take notes on this list. First, in order to see invisible people around you, whether they're isolated or whether they have a bunch of people around them, you got to be silent. So remember, what's a prophet's job? A prophet's job is to speak on behalf of the Lord. But after verse 1, here's my question. Is Elijah doing a lot of talking? He's not talking at all. He's being silent. So, you know, sometimes here's the beauty of silence. When we get so comfortable getting up and just always doing the talking, we forget the discipline of silence. So now as Elijah's sitting there for however long that time period was, and that's probably a while because it would take a while, even in a drought, for a brook to go down. Like it takes a while if you're drinking that. So now as he's sitting there and he's just looking, and he's looking at these unclean ravens that he would have never seen, looking at this place that he would have never went, seeing all these things that God is doing. And then he's going to Zarephath, a Gentile city, and I want you to dwell there. And now I'm just looking around. In order to see the invisible, you gotta be quiet. And you just have to observe. Just sit and watch. Sit and watch around. Sit and hear what people are saying. Oh, okay. Don't necessarily react because you feel like you got to. Oh, okay. Well, I'll think on that. And just sit there and listen. Be silent. Then after the silence, then in order to see people that are invisible where you are, you got to study them. You got to study them. So now as you see people, there's going to be people that say absolutely nothing. Could that be a sign of isolation? Could that be a sign of feeling invisible? Absolutely. But there could be people with the most bubbly personality, with the most, they're literally just giddy all the time. Women and men, just giddy all the time. But sometimes that's a sign, yeah, they're invisible. They're using that to compensate for how they actually feel. So now they feel like they got to be over bubbly and they got to be over the top so they can have somebody see, I have a need. So since nobody's seeing it, I'm going to have to go and I got to go over the top with my personality. That could be a sign. That could be a sign that they're invisible. There could be someone that comes that's just kind of lonely, just says hi every once in a while. There could be something there. There could be someone who comes up when they talk to you and they bring up the same situation all the time, but in different ways. I guess they're invisible too. There could be someone who has a a brash outward wall and nothing breaks that wall. You see, you got to study people. And you study and you look and you see, are they invisible? And then the third one, then you silently serve them. You see, what I've noticed with people that feel invisible, sometimes if someone has that invisibility cloak on them, right, that we've been saying, right? If someone has that invisibility cloak, we think the best way to solve it is to take that cloak, take it off. Look, I see you, right? And do it in some like big, grandiose, huge way. So now they know that I see them, and everybody that knows them knows that I see them. What I found is the best way to help people that feel invisible, whether they're alone or whether they have a bunch of people around them, is to silently serve both of them. So the people that have walls up, the people that are over bubbly, the people that are super silent, the people that over talk about their situation, the people that do this, the people that do that, you just silently send them a quick text. Give them just a small gift and just leave it at their door and just go. Send them a card. Just give them something small. Do something small for them. Why? Because those things culminate to people being seen. But guess what? You can't just do it one time. Well, look, I did it one time, so I guess they know I saw them, right? I sent that one text, so I guess they know I saw them. I gave them that one thing, so I guess they know that I saw them. You have to be super duper, and I know this isn't a word, but super duper ooper consistent. You got to do it silently, consistently. And then guess what? They'll know that you see them. So then that's when they see, how did you know? How did you know this whole time? Because I know what it feels like to be invisible too. You see what God is trying to teach Elijah? From Elijah's glasses, he's trying to teach him, when you get out of this public place, prophesying in my name, right, in the king's court, I'm trying to teach you how to see the invisible. So you got to be silent. You got to study people and just silently serve them. That's how you see the invisible. I want you to go to Zarephath, this Gentile city, and I want you to dwell there. Now watch what he sees. Watch all this silent stuff that's happening. Verse 9. See, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose, he went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, indeed a widow was there, gathering sticks, and he called to her and said, please bring me a little water in a cup that I might drink. So now, what's the last invisible person that he brings? Is a widow. Now remember, at this time, women, how they were viewed in society as basically second class. But then if you didn't have a husband, if you were a widow too, that doesn't help the situation. Which is why in the book of James, pure and undefiled religion is helping widows. Why? Because the church understood how the world viewed women who were widows at the time. So now he begins to see this invisible woman who to society, who to maybe most men, maybe even to other people around her in that town, you're a nobody. You're invisible. Nobody sees you and nobody sees your son. Now you see that the two invisible people are beginning to meet each other. So now what's Elijah's request? Please give me a cup of water that I might drink. Now think about it from Elijah's point of view. God said that there's going to be a widow, and this widow is going to help me based on the command of God. So now we take the glasses off Elijah and we put these glasses on the widow. The widow's out, being a woman, being a widow. She's gathering sticks, and Elijah asks for a cup of water. In most situations, if someone's that desperate, who's going to give somebody that cup of water? It's not going to be me. I need to save what I have for myself and my son. We're getting ready to die here, and you're asking me for a cup of water? So now watch what happens. Verse 11. As she was going to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. So look at the scene here. Elijah comes and asks for a cup of water as she's gathering sticks because she sees that someone needs help, even though she feels invisible. As she's going to help the invisible man, it's almost like Elijah's like, oh yeah, one more thing while you're at it. Can you make me a morsel of bread too? So just look at how this looks, right? You have someone who wants a cup of water in a drought. And she's going to give someone a cup of water in a drought. And as she's going, he asks for more. You see, notice as we serve and as we see those that are invisible, watch how this works. So she said, as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread. I only have a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. And see, I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I might go in, prepare it for myself and my son, that we might eat it and die. Verse 13. So he said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but make me a small cake from it first and bring it to me. Afterwards, make some for yourself and for your son. So now look at this. The two invisible people see each other. So now Elijah's just doing what God told him to do. But then the woman is looking at the situation. I see someone, even though he's a prophet, I see someone who feels invisible too. So instead of thinking about herself, what does she do? She helps him. So what does this prove? People that are invisible can help other people that are invisible. Sometimes we are fascinated and we are enthralled with this idea of fixing people, right? So until I'm completely fixed, then I'll be ready for that. Until I'm completely healed, then I'm ready for that, right? We're so enthralled with this idea of 100% healing. And until I get to that point, then I could be the Christian that I need to be for people. Then when I get to the point, I could be the husband I need to be for my wife. I could be the wife that I need to be for my husband. I could be the preacher or the elder or the deacon I need to be for the church. So then now we find ourselves always stuck in the process. Well, how are things doing? It's a process. Now, I want to be clear and balanced and fair. Am I saying that there's not healing that's needed? There is. So let's not be children and misconstrue this, right? In all situations, is healing necessary? There's no doubt. Is grief necessary? There's no doubt. Is there a time frame on grief? No. Is there a time frame on healing? Absolutely not. No, there is not. And we're not sitting here trying to say that there is. But here's the point. Even if you're in places of grief, even if you're in places of healing, even if you're in places of not feeling fixed, even if you're in places of feeling invisible, guess what this still proves? Even in my grief, even in my healing, even in my invisibility, I could still help someone else. This woman is to the point of death, and she's giving another man a cup of water. This woman's at the point of death, and she's making him bread first before she makes it for her family. So what does this prove? That invisible people, even though I'm still hurting, even though you're still hurting, even though you're still not seen, you can still help. It might not be a grandiose thing. It may not be the biggest thing in the world. It may not be the greatest gift. It may not be the biggest, grandest thing that someone else did. You know, remember when Jesus said in the book of Matthew, if you give someone a cup of water in my name, it's like you've done it to me. Sometimes we forget that the little things, Jesus sees the little invisible things that you've always done for people. And I think the reason why in our invisibility that we have hypnotized ourselves not to help other people is because we already feel invisible. And if I happen to do something for someone else, no one sees it anyway. No one cares anyway. It's not like I'm not going to be invisible anyway. So therefore, I've come up with the conclusion that I'm just not going to help anyone. Our God sees the invisible. Our God sees the invisible to such a level that every tear that you've ever cried, he carries those tears in a bottle. You can't tell me that that's not seeing invisible. It's almost like that argument where people are like, well, if you're in a forest and a tree falls, who hears that tree? Maybe we don't, but God knows it. So we're looking at that from the wrong perspective. When you cry those invisible tears, and when you cry those invisible tears, whether you're alone or whether you always have people around you, God has collected those and he's put those tears in a bottle. He knows. He knows that time where you saw somebody invisible and you handed them a glass of water. He knows that time when no one else wanted to help someone and you were the one that initiated things and you helped somebody. He saw all of that. He knows when you helped someone and you prayed for someone and you wrote someone a card to let them keep going and you gave them a gift and you prayed for them and the tears that you cried for them and the sacrifices that you gave for people. He saw all of that, but no one else knows about it, God, so I feel invisible. Maybe that's where God wants you. Sometimes the season, like in Ecclesiastes, there's a time and a season for everything. And I know it will vary from person to person. But maybe the Lord needed to hide you for a season so you could study, you could be silent, and you could silently serve. Now, here's a final thing that I want to look at here as we look in verse 14. For thus saith the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour will not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth. So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah. She and he and her household ate for many days. The bin of the flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Elijah. Here's a beautiful discipline that the Lord is going to teach you if you submit to going through what Elijah went through. If you submit from, sometimes you back off from being too public and you take that silent time. If you submit to it, here's what he's going to teach you. When you're silent, when you silently study people that are invisible in the ways that they present themselves, and when you silently serve people, he's going to teach you to silently celebrate with him. You know, when we do something for someone, or you sacrifice for someone, or you give your time, or you give your effort, or you give your resources, or you give so much, right? We want to return, right? We always equate it to like stocks and all these things. If I put an investment in something, right, in a person, place, or thing, right? If I put an investment in it, I want to return, right? That's the nature of how we work. But when God does this for us, when we serve people who feel unseen, and when we serve him and when we help him, Jesus teaches you how to celebrate with just you and him. Lord, did you see their face, God? That was great. Who saw that? Nobody, but God, man, thank you for just letting them come into my life. I appreciate it. You say a prayer and I'm thankful, Lord. We can celebrate that together. Then we were able to help this person, and they did that, and now they're on their way, and now they're doing all these great things. Lord, we can celebrate that, just me and you together. You know, you learn to celebrate with God by himself, and he teaches you how to do that. And so this topic, this is why I said I love it, is because when you see people that are invisible, when you see people that are unseen, when you're consistent with them as God was consistent with Elijah and how he's consistent with us, it's more rewarding than any award, than any plaque, than any compliment, than anything that I could ever receive in public. It's more rewarding than anything else. Just to see that you saw somebody that was unseen and now they're doing things, and now they're doing. I mean, that's the reward. And the beautiful thing is, the Lord sees that, and He blesses you for it, and you become a blessing to other people. So now here's what's so cool is imagine you having this mindset. And now imagine the way that the Lord has disciplined you to see other people. Here's what's so cool about how this works is imagine someone else seeing you the way that you see other people. When that day happens, I mean, that's next level stuff. I'm not even ready for that. That's next level stuff. When someone sees you the way that the Lord has trained you to see other people. Man, all right, we gotta stop. We gotta stop. That's too much. But we appreciate you guys, man. We love you guys. We're so grateful for what you guys do and how you guys help us, and we study and we do these things, and we just want to help you. We just want to help people, and that's what we exist here on the podcast. So we appreciate you guys, man. We love you guys. The Lord sees you. All these little things that you do that seem unseen for your family, for those around you, for people that you've come in contact with, past, present, and future. I promise you the Lord has seen the smallest thing that you've ever done. He's seen it all. He's kept record. Now it's your time to celebrate with Him and then just help someone else. So we love you guys, man. We appreciate you guys. And Lord willing, we will be back with another podcast on Monday. Thanks, guys.